everyone, welcome to Lipstick on a Rig. Today we're going to be making this beanie, and this is actually an adaptation of a beanie that I made that is in the round, but this beanie is a lot more beginner friendly because we actually crochet a large rectangle and then weave the ends together. So if you're new to crochet, I highly encourage you to try out this beanie pattern. For this project, I'm going to be using size 4 medium weight acrylic yarn, and this is just the Big Twist Value brand. I'm also going to be using a size F or 5 crochet hook. And we're going to begin this with a brim that is 25 stitches deep and roughly 18 inches in length. And if you haven't already, then please check out the precursor to this video, and that is the brim making tutorial video. And you will find a link to my brim making tutorial video in the description. The first thing to note is to make sure that you have ended on the side where your crochet hook is on the same side as your starting tail. Go ahead and make sure that you've added your chain 1 at the end of your last row. So I used a couple of scrap pieces of yarn and I tried to mark this brim into 4 even sections like this. So now what we're going to try to do is place 10 crisscross stitches in each of our sections so that we have a total of 40 crisscross stitches. So to get started, as you can tell, we don't have any traditional stitches along the brim here. So you're just going to have to work in the loops at the top of the brim. So the first thing that you want to do is place a slip stitch in one of your loops moving forward. And from here we're going to chain 2. So now working backwards rather than forwards, we're going to place a double crochet in the top of this chain 1 stitch. And you've created 1 crisscross stitch. So now you're just going to want to skip your next loop, and diving right into the next loop, you're going to place a double crochet. Then you're going to work back in your skipped loop and place a double crochet there. And that's how you work a crisscross stitch. But keep in mind that since we don't have traditional stitches, you're just going to try to space these out evenly so that you can get 10 crisscrosses in each section and a total of 40 crisscrosses for the entire row. And when you get to the end of your row, it should look something like this. So now go ahead and turn your work, and we have not placed any turning chains or anything like that. So skipping the stitch directly beside your crochet hook right here, you're going to place a double crochet in the next stitch. And then you're going to go back to your skip stitch and place a double crochet. And that's how you're going to start each of your rows. From here, you're just going to skip the next stitch and place a double crochet in the following stitch. And then go back to your skip stitch and place a double crochet. And that's going to be your pattern for the rest of the row. And make sure that the stitch that you're skipping is not the stitch that you've already worked in, but a stitch that has not been worked yet. So we're going to skip this stitch and dive right into our next stitch. So go ahead and follow that pattern, placing crisscross stitches going all the way along your row. I went ahead and crocheted 10 rows of placing my crisscross stitch. If you want to make it a little bit longer, you can. It's just going to make the beanie slouchier. So just kind of keep that in mind. So now what we're going to do is we are going to cut and tie off our yarn. So if you have a crochet needle, you can use that, and all you're really going to do is just sort of weave these 2 edges together. But if you don't have a crochet needle, and I'm all about having the least amount of materials possible to make something, then I'm going to show you how we're going to do this with the crochet hook. So grab your strand of yarn again, and what we're going to do, I'm going to start at the top up here, but it really doesn't matter whether you start at the bottom or the top. And since we don't have any traditional stitches going along the edge here until you get to your slip stitches, when you're working in this side, you're just going to want to work with any available loops on the edge here that you can. And you're just going to want to draw this yarn through that. Sort of the exact same thing you would do with a crochet needle, but you're just doing it with your crochet hook, so it takes a little bit more time. And I like to pull this out nice and long. And so you're just going to find available loops all along this edge, and you're just going to sort of weave this yarn through the available loops like this. So one thing I like to do when I am weaving this is I like to make sure that I've lined up my slip stitches so that I'm weaving this so that it won't be off kilter when I do get to my slip stitches. And then all you're going to want to do when you're weaving in your slip stitches is just make sure that you weave through the entire stitch of both sides of the edge here. So capturing both stitches, then you're just going to pull the yarn through for a nice back and forth weave like this. And so again, making sure that you have inserted your crochet hook up underneath the entire stitch on both edges. You can pull through the other edge there. And it would be the same process if you're using a crochet needle. Just make sure that you're placing that needle up underneath both sides of the edge here and that you're capturing the entire stitch. So once you're done weaving the entire edge together, it should look something like this. So now what we're going to do is we are just going to tie off both ends of the yarn. So I'm going to show you how to quickly tie off the edge where your brim is. Find a loop right here on the very edge on the opposite side of where you left off with your weave. And then I just like to place my thumb right here so that when I yarn over, I can keep sort of a larger loop there, like that. And then I'm just going to grab my tail and pull it through that larger loop. And typically with beanie patterns and stuff like this, I don't like to tie a knot necessarily because see how it kind of cinched up really fast there. So you have to make sure that this doesn't cinch up and create a ridge in your brim. So now you can just repeat that one more time. And then from here, you're just going to want to take this tail and weave it along the edge of your brim. Now typically I would say you would want to weave it back up the edge here, and that's fine. You can weave it back up the edge, but just make sure that your tail does not reach this portion of the crisscross here. So you might want to cut your tail kind of short and then weave it halfway up the ridge. Or like I said, you can weave it along the edge here. So I chose to weave mine halfway up the ridge and just sort of cut it off sort of short. And don't forget to hold on to any of the tails that you cut because they make great stitch markers or stuffing in other projects. And so this side is going to be really simple. All you're going to want to do is just cut your yarn off. And all you want to do is just make sure that your tension is about right, that it's not cinching it up, but it's also not loose. So a good way to tell is just pull the two edges together like this while you hold your yarn in place, and you can see any areas where it needs to be a little bit improved. And so once you've gotten this tension correct, then you're just going to want to tie this to your end tail here. And I like to tie it a couple of times. So now the last step is just going to be to weave along the edge up here. And instead of working in the stitches, I like to work between my crisscrosses. And I always like to start where I left off before, so right here. So I'm going to start where all these other tails are. I'm just going to weave that in, and you just kind of have to hold on to it to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And then I'm just going to weave it in between my crisscrosses like this. If you weave it in every stitch, it gets a little bit tight and it gets hard to work with, and your hole at the end will be a little bit large. So this will help kind of close that gap a little bit. And once you are done weaving this around your edge, then you're just going to want to grab the two tails of that strand and pull them really tight. And then you're just going to tie these two ends together. And keep in mind that if you tie this too tight, it will break your yarn, so you kind of have to find a good balance there. I like to secure it with 3 knots. And then I always like to tie it to my other tails here. So these would be the end tail and then our other tail from when we weaved the edge. And then once you're done, you're just going to draw these tails to the inside, and I'm going to attach a poof ball. And in case you're interested, I will link to my DIY poof ball maker. It only costs $4 and it makes really nice poof balls. And as you can see, this is the side where we attached the seam, so it's not as visible. I do have a beanie pattern where I crochet this crisscross stitch in the round, So if you're comfortable with crocheting in the round, you might want to check that out, and I will link to that in the description. Please let me know in the comments below if you experienced any issues while you were making this, and I will do my best to help you out. If this video helped you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel, Lipstick on a Rig. Thank you so much for working with me, and I hope you have a wonderful, awesome day.